Mark was the first to see it. They'd been hiking for 6 hours along a narrow Appalachian trail, boots heavy with mud, when he stopped so suddenly that the others nearly ran into him. "Why are we stopping?" Nate asked, brushing a branch from his face. Mark didn't answer. He just stared ahead, between the trees where something caught the afternoon light. Straight edges, right angles. "Guys," he said quietly, "you're seeing this too, right?" They pushed through a wall of undergrowth and stepped into a small clearing. There, arranged in a rough semicircle, stood a dozen wooden cabins, small, but not tiny. Each one was waist-high, maybe chest-high at most, built with uncanny precision. At first glance, it looked almost whimsical, like a playground village. But as they drew closer, the craftsmanship became impossible to ignore. Hand-carved railings, glass windows, miniature porches, every board fitted tightly, weathered by rain, but well-maintained. Lena raised her camera. "Okay, this is insane," she murmured, snapping photos. "Someone built all this by hand." Mark crouched beside one of the houses, tracing his fingers along the wood. The surface was smooth, treated, not rotted at all. This took months, maybe years. "Come on," said Thomas, the skeptic. "It's an art thing. You know how people get. Build weird crap in the woods, post it online." Mark shook his head. "Then why out here? There's no road for miles." No one replied. The forest hummed, the cicadas, the faint hiss of wind through leaves. Sarah stepped around a cabin and froze. "Hey, come look at this." In the soft mud near the edge of the clearing were footprints. Small, barefoot, maybe the size of a toddler's. But they weren't children's prints. The toes were long, thin, pressed deep, leaving crescent-shaped marks at the tips, as if they dug into the soil for grip. "Jesus," Nate muttered, "that's not an animal." Thomas gave a nervous laugh. "Maybe kids, locals, campers, I don't know." Mark looked at him. There are no locals this deep in the range. They wandered between the cabins, curiosity outweighing reason. One had a small stone fireplace, its chimney blackened with soot. Another had furniture, tiny chairs, a low table, all carved with care. "Someone actually lived here," Sarah whispered. "Or still does," Lena said. Mark bent down to a door about level with his chest. It was wide enough for a person to lean through if they crouched. The hinges creaked softly as he pushed it open. The smell inside was earthy, damp wood, and something faintly metallic. He ducked his head in. The space was cramped, lit by a narrow shaft of sunlight through a cracked window. Inside were shelves made of bark, a bowl carved from stone, and several long, pale objects laid neatly across the floor. Bones, small, animal maybe, stripped clean. Mark pulled his head back out, his voice lower. "There's stuff inside. It's not abandoned." Thomas forced a grin that didn't reach his eyes. "So, someone made a hobby out of pretending to be forest hobbits. Then who keeps the fires going?" Mark asked, nodding toward the chimney. The grin faltered. Lena turned, raising her camera for another shot, then paused. "Wait," she said. "That door wasn't open before." They all turned. The nearest cabin's door, a squat, knee-high rectangle, now hung slightly ajar. Mark approached slowly. "Did anyone touch that?" No one answered. The only sound was the wind whispering through the treetops. He crouched down and pushed the door wider. Inside, nothing moved, just a thin layer of straw and the dark opening of a hole dug into the earthen floor slanting downward. The air felt colder there, the kind of chill that doesn't come from weather. Thomas broke the silence with forced bravado. "Okay, that's enough. Let's pack up before we start creeping ourselves out." Then came the sound, a dull thud from somewhere behind the farthest cabin. Not loud, not close, but deliberate. Everyone froze. Lena's camera strap creaked as she lowered it. Sarah's breathing quickened. Mark straightened, scanning the trees. "Don't move," he whispered. The forest was still, too still. Then, somewhere deep between the trunks, something shifted. A flicker of motion, low to the ground, gone before any of them could focus. Mark's jaw tightened. We're not alone out here. They didn't go far. After the discovery, the group pushed deeper into the woods, trying to put distance between themselves and that eerie little settlement. But by the time the light began to fade, the forest grew steeper, denser, nowhere flat enough for camp. "Let's just stop here," Nate said finally, dropping his pack near a fallen log. "We'll find the trail again in the morning." Mark hesitated, glancing back through the trees. He couldn't see the clearing anymore, only endless green and shadow. But he still felt its presence behind them, like a weight pressing at the back of his skull. They set up camp in silence. The routine, tents, firewood, water filter, helped calm their nerves. The smell of smoke soon mixed with pine and damp soil. When the fire was going, they sat close, shoulders brushing, eyes reflecting the flickering orange light. No one mentioned the village for a while. Eventually, Sarah spoke. "Those prints, they looked human." Thomas exhaled sharply. They weren't. Or if they were, it was a prank. There's no mystery here. Just backwoods weirdos. Backwoods weirdos with perfect carpentry skills and chimneys, Lena muttered, staring into the flames. Nate tossed a twig into the fire. Could have been a hunting camp for kids, like a theme thing. Appalachian folklore, little cabins, whatever. Mark shook his head. Then where's the path? The tools, footprints of normal size. Silence again. The only sound was the pop of sap in the wood and the occasional sigh of wind. It wasn't until later, when the fire had burned down to embers, that Mark noticed it. The forest was too quiet. No night insects, no owls, just the thin, empty hum of stillness. He sat up, listening. Sarah, who shared his tent, stirred. "What's wrong?" "Nothing," he said. "Go back to sleep." But he didn't. The quiet pressed in on him, thick and heavy. Then came a faint sound, not from the trees, but from below the ridge, like something stepping through wet leaves. Slow, careful. Mark reached for his flashlight. The beam cut through the dark, only trunks, mist, nothing else. He waited, listened. Another step, then another, soft, deliberate. He crawled out of the tent, motioning silently for Nate and Thomas. They emerged, bleary-eyed, their breath clouding in the cool air. "You hear that?" Mark whispered. Nate nodded slowly. "Yeah, it's close." Thomas frowned, squinting into the dark. "Probably a deer or a bear. Then why does it sound like it's circling us?" They stood motionless for several minutes. The fire cast a weak orange halo over the clearing, but beyond that, pitch black. Then, faintly, something cracked. Not a heavy branch, something thin, like a twig breaking under a bare foot. Sarah crawled out of her tent, hugging her jacket tight. "What's happening?" Mark gestured for her to stay quiet. He turned off his flashlight and let his eyes adjust. Between the trees, maybe 20 meters away, something flickered. Movement low to the ground, gone the instant he focused on it. A breath of cold wind brushed his neck. Nate swallowed. "I saw it," he whispered. "Something short, moving fast." Thomas gave a nervous laugh. "You guys are losing it. It's shadows." But then, just beyond the faint edge of firelight, came another sound. A rustle, followed by the unmistakable clatter of metal. They turned toward the noise. One of the backpacks lay open, its contents spilled across the dirt. "The hell?" Nate whispered. "Who touched that?" Mark swept the flashlight beam across the clearing. No one there. Just their gear, the trees, and near the log, a tiny footprint pressed into the soil. Fresh, bare. The air felt colder, the silence deeper. Thomas finally spoke, voice trembling just a little. "Let's pack up. First light, we're gone." Mark didn't argue. He kept watch the rest of the night, sitting by the dying fire, eyes locked on the darkness beyond the tents. No more sounds, no movement. But when dawn came and the others stirred awake, they noticed something that made his stomach twist. Their food bag was gone, completely. The ground beneath where it had hung was covered in dozens of small prints, overlapping each other, as if a crowd had gathered in silence, feet sinking into the mud, just a few feet from where they slept. By noon, the heat was back. The forest steamed with moisture, every leaf dripping from the morning mist. They hiked in silence, tired and irritable, packs heavier than ever. "Trail should have bent east by now," Nate said, checking the GPS on his phone. "No signal," Thomas replied, staring at his screen. "Just static." Mark walked ahead, scanning the trees for trailblazes, but there were none. The Appalachian trail markers, normally carved or painted on trunks, had vanished miles ago. "We're off the path," Lena said. Mark didn't deny it. By mid-afternoon, the silence had changed. It wasn't just quiet, it was listening. Every twig snap underfoot felt too loud. Every pause stretched too long. "Let's stop for water," Sarah said weakly. They dropped their packs near a stream. The air there was cooler, but thick with the smell of moss and rot. As they filled bottles, Mark crouched by the water's edge. Something glinted between the stones. A piece of metal. He fished it out. A rusted knife blade, no handle. Too small for a hunting knife, too crude to be store-bought. The edge had been sharpened unevenly, by hand. He turned it over in his palm. "Someone's been living out here," he said. "Yeah," Nate muttered, "and stealing food." They ate quickly. Protein bars, jerky, no one really tasting anything. The fatigue settled deep, making conversation dull and forced. "Listen," Thomas said suddenly, head snapping up. "Did you hear that?" They froze. Somewhere up the ridge, a faint thud, then another. Not footsteps exactly, but something moving. "Probably deer," Nate said, too fast. "Then why does it stop when we stop?" Lena whispered. No one answered. They packed up again, faster this time. The woods around them seemed endless, repeating. The same fallen log, the same crooked pine. Mark had the creeping sense they were walking in circles. As the sun began to drop, they reached a shallow ravine. Mark decided to make camp there. We'll rest, get our bearings tomorrow." The others didn't argue. Exhaustion was stronger than fear. By dusk, the fire crackled weakly, and a heavy silence settled again. Thomas sat apart from the group, fiddling with his headlamp, muttering about getting out at first light. When Mark woke later, he wasn't sure why. The fire was mostly ash. The air felt colder. He looked around. 4 tents, but only 3 zipped shut. "Thomas?" No answer. Mark crawled out, scanning the camp. The forest loomed black around them, the moonlight faint through the canopy. Thomas's tent flap was open, his sleeping bag empty. "Thomas?" Mark hissed. No sound, no movement, only the rhythmic drip of water from the branches. He shook Nate awake. "He's gone." "What do you mean gone?" "His tent's empty." They searched with flashlights, calling quietly. The beams cut through mist and branches, flashing across tree trunks, bushes, mud. Then Sarah stopped short. "Over here!" At the base of a tree lay Thomas's flashlight, still on. The beam pointed into the undergrowth, where the soil had been disturbed, dragged in a long arc downhill, as if something had pulled him silently away. Lena crouched, covering her mouth. "There's no blood." "No struggle either," Mark said. He didn't run. They followed the marks a few meters, but they ended abruptly near a fallen log. The ground there churned with dozens of tiny footprints, all barefoot, pressed deep into the mud. "Jesus Christ," Nate whispered. "What are we looking at?" Mark didn't answer. He aimed his light across the ravine and froze. For just a second, among the trees, something reflected the beam back at him. Not eyes exactly, but something glossy, dark, low to the ground. It vanished as soon as he blinked. He turned off the light. The group stood in the dark, barely breathing. Then came a sound, faint, distant, but unmistakable. A hollow knock. Once, then again. Regular, measured, like someone tapping wood on wood. It echoed across the trees, deliberate and steady, as if counting. Mark spoke quietly, barely a whisper. "They're not hiding anymore." They didn't sleep. The tapping echoed through the night, slow, patient, like someone marking time. When dawn finally broke, it felt more like a reprieve than sunrise. "Thomas could still be alive," Sarah said, her voice trembling. Mark nodded. "Then we find him. Once we do, we're gone." They followed the trail where the footprints had been thickest. It wound through roots and bramble until the ground dipped into a hollow, damp and silent. At the center, a dark opening, about 1 meter high, framed by gnarled roots like ribs. The air seeping from it smelled of soil and rot. "Jesus," Nate murmured. "That's where he went." Mark crouched, flashlight ready. "We go together." No noise. They crawled in one by one. The tunnel walls were packed with clay and interwoven sticks, slick with moisture. The air was warm, heavy, almost pulsing. Somewhere deeper inside, water dripped steadily, like a heartbeat. When they turned a corner, the light fell on crude carvings scratched into the walls. Small figures crowding around larger ones, all faceless. "Why the hell would anyone draw this?" Lena whispered. No one answered. The passage opened into a low chamber. The air there was cold, metallic. On the ground lay a torn boot, a backpack, and a familiar flashlight, Thomas's. Sarah gasped, He's here." Before Mark could speak, a sound came from deeper in. A rustle, fast and dry, followed by a breath. Nate swung his light and froze. A figure crouched near the wall. Small, hairless, its skin pale as ash, stretched thin across wiry limbs. Black, glassy eyes stared back, unblinking. It hissed, and the tunnel erupted with movement. Dozens of shapes shifted in the dark, hands and limbs scraping across clay. "Back!" Mark shouted. "Go!" They scrambled toward the tunnel, slipping on wet soil. Behind them came the sound of crawling, rapid, synchronized, closing fast. Something caught Nate's ankle. He screamed as pale fingers clamped around his boot and yanked hard. Mark grabbed his arm, but the grip was too strong, cold, sinewy, relentless. Nate's flashlight dropped, spinning, and for a split second, its beam caught what was dragging him. A face small and sharp, mouth full of tiny, pointed teeth. "Help me!" Nate's scream cut off as he was pulled into the dark, his voice swallowed by the earth. Mark shouted his name, but there was nothing, only the wet slither of movement receding down the tunnel. "Move!" he yelled. "Now!" They crawled upward, hearts pounding, lungs burning. The sound of pursuit followed, scuttling, tapping, whispering breaths. They burst into daylight, tumbling out onto the forest floor. Mark turned, flashlight shaking in his hand, but the hole was already empty, silent. Then, a faint tapping from below. 3 slow beats. Then 3 more. They ran. Branches whipped their faces. Roots tore at their boots. The forest was alive with motion. Flickers of pale shapes darting between trunks, low to the ground. "They're behind us!" Lena shouted. "Keep running!" Mark barked. Screams echoed through the trees. Not loud, but sharp, human. Sarah's breath hitched as she looked back. "They're everywhere!" They sprinted downhill, feet slipping on mud. Then Lena's boot caught on a root. She fell hard. "Lena!" Mark turned, reaching for her hand. But before he could grab her, something shot from the bushes, pale and fast, wrapping around her leg. She shrieked, clawing at the dirt, eyes wide. "Mark!" He lunged forward, but the thing yanked her back, impossibly strong. She disappeared into the brush, her screams muffled, then silenced. Sarah sobbed. "No! No, no!" Mark grabbed her wrist. "Don't look back." They ran until the light dimmed again, until their bodies ached and their throats burned. The forest around them seemed endless, a maze of shadows and damp earth. Then Mark's foot hit something hollow. The ground cracked, and before he could react, the world gave way beneath them. They fell, 5 feet maybe more, into darkness and mud. Sarah gasped, "What? What is this?" Mark shone his flashlight. They were in a pit. The walls were dirt, lined with branches woven tightly together. The floor was littered with bones, small, brittle, pale as ivory. Some still had scraps of fabric clinging to them. He lifted the beam upward. The rim of the pit was a jagged ring of roots and leaves, and around it, silhouettes began to gather. Dozens of them, pale figures, short and silent, leaning over the edge. Their eyes caught the light, black and glimmering. Sarah backed against the wall, shaking. "Mark!" He said nothing. His breath came shallow, controlled. The flashlight trembled in his hand. The creatures didn't move closer. They just watched, studying, waiting. Then one of them began to tap, slow, deliberate, against the wood. 3 times. Pause. 3 more. From deeper in the forest, more answered, the same rhythm, spreading through the trees like a pulse. Sarah clutched Mark's arm. "What does it mean?" Mark stared up at them, his voice barely a whisper. "It means we were never running away." The tapping grew louder. The last thing they saw before the light flickered out was a dozen small faces leaning closer, teeth glinting in the dark, and the forest above them closing in like a mouth.
If this story unsettled you, leave a like and let the shadows know. Subscribe for more tales you shouldn't hear after dark. And if you've seen something you can't explain, tell us in the comments. We're always listening.